Hey guys, today we are going to do some more factoring, but this time we're going to factor where the a value, or this value here in front of the x, is not equal to 1. In other words, when we look at this trinomial, there's going to be a number in front of the x squared that's visible to us. Okay? So, for complex trinomial, first we're going to check and make sure there's no common factor. Sometimes we'll be given one like this, it's kind of across the lines here, but we could have 2x squared plus 4x minus 6. And in fact, for that one, we could just common factor out the 2, and then we'd be looking at one that was a simple trinomial, and we could factor, the way we did before. Okay? So we're going to look at one that doesn't have a common factor. And so first of all, we're going to go through this and look at where these come from. Because the problem is we could have an equation like this. And my lines don't quite line up here, but we've got 2x plus 3 times 3x plus 4. So if we use FOIL, then we're going to say, well, 2x times 3x is going to give us 6x squared. Then when we have 2x times 4, we get 8x. And then when we have 3x times 3, 3 times 3x, we're going to have 9x. And then finally, we're left with 3 times 4, which is 12. Now when we collect those two like terms, we get that this is equal to 6x squared plus 17x plus 12. And there we go. So you can see, it's a little bit more complex when we expand these than, some of these other ones, because we have numbers that are multiplying with all the other numbers. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to do this same thing, but we're going to try and do it backwards. And so in other words, or rather, I'll call your attention to the fact that we took this 8x and this 9x and we combine them to make the 17x. And what we're going to do is instead we're going to start with the 17 and we're going to change it into the 9 and the 8. Okay? So, how would we do the opposite? Well, we need to break up the middle term, which in this case was 17x, into two terms above it, from the outside and the inside port. The FOIL. So this would be the 8x and the 9x. So we're going to write out the first 4 terms out of the line then. Well, we had 6x squared plus 8x plus 9x plus 12. Now, when it's written like this, with all 4 terms, what this should remind you of, hopefully, is this is going to be factoring by grouping. Okay? Factoring by grouping. Alright? So, there are many ways to break up the second term. Whoops. And the process we're going to use is what we call decomposition. Decomposition. All right. So let's look at how that works. So we need to find the correct combination that allow us to do this factor. We could have split that middle term up if I jump back over. Well, I can't. That 17x there, we could have split that up into anything. I mean, it could have been a 7, a 10, 6, 11, but we need it to be an 8 and a 9 or this won't work. And so we have to figure out what two numbers do we have to split that 17 up into. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the a and the c value, which is going to be the first term and the last term. Whoops, the last term. Okay? And we're going to multiply them. So we've got 6 times 12. And that's going to give us 72. These circles are in the wrong spot. What it's supposed to say is that we need it to add to, I'll just write it here, and add to b, which is equal in this case to 17. Okay, so we need to find these two numbers. They have to multiply 72, they have to add to 17, and unfortunately there's not a lot of great ways to do this. Typically what you'll do is you'll want to break down that middle term into its, or the 72 rather, into its factors and kind of go through and find one that adds to 17. If you can't do that, sometimes it's alright, especially if they're all positive like this. You can actually just go through the 17 and say, well, what two numbers add to 17 first? So you got, you know, 1 and 16, 2 and 15. You can go through the list. It's a slower way to do it, but it will work. Okay? And you'll get better at it as you practice, but what you will find in this case, of course, is that 8 and 9 are the numbers. And we knew that ahead of time because we kind of cheated and went backwards. But 8 times 9 is equal to 72. And 8 plus 9 is equal to the 17 we need it to be. Okay? So those are the two numbers that we need. So we have our decomposed term, and we write our for term and proceed to factor by grouping. All right. Which I'll go over in a second if you have forgotten it. So here we are. We started with 6x squared plus 17x plus 12. And so we say, all right, well then that's now going to be 6x squared plus 8x plus 9x plus 12. Now one of the beauties of this process of decomposition here is if I'd put the 9x before the 8x, it won't make a difference. You'll get the same answer anyway. These middle two steps will be a little different, but it doesn't matter. You're going to end with the same thing. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we're just going to ignore sort of this part here. We just pretend it's not there. We've just got 6x squared plus 8x, and we common factor out everything we can. Okay, so the only number that we'll factor out of 6 and 8 is going to be 2. And then we say, well, we've got x squared and x. We can factor an x out of both of those. So we're left with 3x plus 4. Okay, and to get those two numbers, we just took the 6x squared and divided it by 2x. That gave us 3x. We took 8x divided by 2x, and we get 4. I think I said that wrong just now, but that's what you do. You divide 6x squared by 2x, 8x by 2x, and that gives you two terms. So now we move on to the next two terms. So we'll actually ignore these two terms here. Just pretend they're not there. We're done with them. So then we move on to the 9x plus 12. So again, we say what's our greatest common factor. Be careful if you're factoring a negative number out. But in this case, everything's positive, so it's going to work really well. And we're just going to say, well, the only thing we can factor out is a 3. Don't forget to write that plus 3, and that's where if you're factoring a negative number, you'll have to write that there, and don't forget to divide, but you will get that with practice. So now we just say, all right, 9x divided by 3 is going to give us 3x. And then we have 12 divided by 3 is going to give us 4. Now what's great about this is hopefully you've noticed that the 3x plus 4 is the same as the 3x plus 4 there. Now if you get to this step and those two brackets are not the same, that means you've made a mistake somewhere. Okay? You probably picked the wrong two numbers here and here. Probably. Either that or you might have factored wrong. But if those two sets of brackets are not the same, this won't work. It means you've made a mistake, so you're going to have to go back, unfortunately. But fortunately for us, our two sets of brackets are the same, so we can move forward. And all you're going to do, and what we're doing is we're factoring out the 3x plus 4, sort of treating it as its own variable. But to be honest with you, you don't even actually really need to know that. As long as you remember that you take whatever's in that two sets of brackets and you write it out in its own set of brackets, and then you just write out what's left over. So we factored that out. We're left with the 2x plus 3. So we write 2x plus 3. And that is it. Okay? All right. So what I want you to do is I want you to give some of those questions on the next page a shot. The answers are there, but we're going to go through them in class. So until next time, go Sabres.